Thank you all so much for your hard work in getting ready for today.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining us. Our charge from the Leadership Council earlier this year in February was to join you and invite your conversations about how we worship. And so we will do that at this time. So the charge, if we can have the first slide come up, is as follows. For the task force to develop and implement a comprehensive communications plan to engage the congregation in discussion about the evolution of worship to improve accessibility, deepen connection, and increase agility. So one of the ways we did this, or the two primary vehicles for accomplishing this objective, was to establish a series of conversations among the congregation. We had 4 of those, and to have a survey that was sent electronically to others. And we'll be telling you more specifics about those 2 aspects of our plan in the coming moments. So we sought to explore elements in our worship services, its practices, music, use of technology, and space. That was one of our goals for this process, to view worship through the lens of our values, our statement of purpose as a congregation, with an eye to the key goals of accessibility, community, and cohesion, to listen to one another, and to share what we learn to support the congregation, you all, as we move forward. And that is what we're doing today. So the report will be presented by 4 members of the task force whose longevity at Union Church stretches from 2 years to 20 years. So that's a good range of involvement at Union. Catherine Spinella, Tim Chris, Rob Aricane, and I will walk you through this together. And then at the conclusion, we will have an opportunity for Q&A, which we'll do through the chat, so that if you have a question at the conclusion of this report, we invite you to participate via chat. So we want to start out with what we learned and give you just some top line learnings that we had in our process. And the first thing and most consistent thing that we learned is that we as a congregation love our church. We find it inspirational and empowering through our sermons and other aspects of worship, and huge thanks to Dave and Katrina for that. We love the high quality music program that we have at our church that uses diverse genres of music. And the virtual worship experience that we've had over Zoom has enhanced our joys and concerns and taught us other things about our congregation. We have discovered, rediscovered, reimagined our strong sense of a caring community that exists at Union. And we appreciate the active participation among children and seek to even enhance that as we move forward. We discovered that there is a sense of peace and comfort that is enhanced by the Tiffany windows and other aspects of our sanctuary, the use of the organ and the harpsichord. And we have really appreciated the interweaving of our internal nurture, how we minister to one another, and our outreach to the world beyond our walls. We've also learned within this context of loving our church that we are a diverse congregation and that we experience and appreciate worship in different ways. We bring varied worship experiences to Union. We're no longer able to assume that people who come to church have always come to church, and especially not to a UCC congregation, but we've been able to draw on that rich experience of our membership as we consider our worship moving forward. We've learned that we respond to various musical genres differently, but that we appreciate the diversity in what we hear. We appreciate moments of both silence and exuberance in our worship, and we look forward to both of those elements continuing as we go forward. Some of us prefer the current seating arrangement, others find it inflexible and distancing, and many are curious about other options we might consider in the future. And I love that curiosity component that is so important, not only as we look at worship, but as our life together. And so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn the presentation over to Catherine Spinella, who will walk us through other learnings that we've had along the way. Catherine?
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So Bob spoke to our charge to engage the congregation in conversation and our goals with respect to those conversations. And I'm here to provide an overview of our process consistent with those goals and to share some of the results from the survey. So let me start with a joy. We estimate that upwards of 130 of us shared our thoughts and listened to each other's perspectives, either through a conversation or the survey document or both. So thank you all for this fabulous response and engagement, for sharing your time and opening up about a very personal topic, our experience of worship. As you can see from this slide, we began with the coffee hour conversations on March 28th. And then over a 2-week period during the second half of April, we held 10 small group conversations over Zoom, 1 conversation with our youth on the porch, and 2 Zoom conversations with Learning Center students. We also had a number of conversations with non-Zoomers. Almost 100 folks took the time to complete the survey. Another joy is that the survey responses that we received reflected a representative cross-section of the congregation, and one that was generally consistent with the demographics of our church. We had a mix of ages, from Learning Center students as young as 3 to our youth to folks with many, many decades of life experience. We heard from folks who have worshiped with Union for decades and those who have begun worshiping with us much more recently, and everybody in between. We heard from those with children at home and those without. So let's dive into it and talk about the survey, which certainly provided a rich data set to inform and guide our task force discussions, and which actually was consistent with and reinforced what we heard from the small group discussions. We appreciate that so many of you included thoughtful and heartfelt comments. I'd like to share a few of the highlights from the survey with you here, and then we will turn to the conversations themselves and the feedback we received. It was gratifying to see how meaningful our service and the elements of our service are to us. I would highlight that more than 90% of us found the sermons to deepen our spiritual experience, and many of us said they were very important. Over 80% said that prayer time, including joys and concerns, music, scripture, and outreach presentations consistently deepen and enrich our spiritual experience and inspire us. Folks also commented on the community aspect of worship. And we know from comments, and it bears remembering, that what is important and meaningful to one may be experienced differently by another. When asked what physical elements create an environment that helps you connect spiritually, more than 80% of us identified the Tiffany windows. In addition to the Tiffany windows, almost 60% mentioned the organ. Close to half of us mentioned lighting, flowers, the conic windows, and the altar, the communion table. Roughly a third of us mentioned the pews and the current seating arrangement. In describing our sanctuary, the most frequently heard responses were traditional, formal, warm, peaceful, serene, and beautiful. We also asked what kinds of music help us to connect spiritually. Interestingly, spirituals top the list with just over 65% checking that box, followed by classical and instrumental. About half of us found gospel and jazz to be spiritually moving. Just under half of us mentioned music from the hymnals. Folk music and chants were mentioned by over 40% of respondents. There was less enthusiasm for praise music, but there was interest in contemporary, uplifting, melodic music and music accessible to families and children. There was also appreciation for our many, many really talented musicians. Some other takeaways from the survey. Respondents mentioned sound quality most often in thinking about what is important in promoting accessibility and a welcoming atmosphere. Most people think that the length of our Zoom services is just about right. Once the pandemic is over, 2/3 of respondents plan to worship in person almost always. People will continue, of course, to worship online when it suits their circumstances. Many expressed their desire to see online worship continue as an option, and some mentioned the upcoming move to live streaming. Online worship was viewed as a means to join worship when traveling, living at a distance, and on Sundays with bad weather. So now I would like to turn it over to Tim, who will walk us through some of the small group discussion questions and the responses.
Yeah, but as Catherine said, we held a number of conversations, 9 breakout groups over 4 days, plus the Learning Center conversations and the youth group conversation, as well as a number of direct calls. And in these conversations, we wanted to get a sense of how members of Union think and talk about worship. So we wanted to understand examples of powerful or moving experiences of worship that we've had at Union. And what was it about that experience that moved us? Digging a little deeper, we asked about what parts of the worship service help to deepen a connection to God and also to living out our values in our everyday lives. We also wanted to understand what keeps us from experiencing worship in the way that we would like, either online or in person. And then finally, kind of an open-ended conversation. What did we miss? What else would you like to talk about? What new ideas do you have that you would like to explore? So taking a look first at the meaningful worship experiences, the scribes in these conversations did yeoman work because we have pages and pages and pages of notes on comments from the participants in these conversations. And one thing that I found really remarkable was that everyone could recall or describe a meaningful worship experience at Union. And I think that's good news. Of course, there was a wide variety of responses. Some people recalled special one-time experiences, while many others recalled what I would consider layered or repeated experiences, kind of the cumulative impact of doing over and listening to sermons over and over again, or taking communion over and over again. In looking at the special one-time experiences, and just to show a few examples among the many mentioned, several people recalled the special service on 9/11 at the end of the day, the silence and the powerful emotion on that occasion. Another person recalled a particular memorial service when the afternoon sun was streaming through the Tiffany windows, and it was just a very special moment. One person who joined our church recently recalled that the first time he came as a jazz service, and it's a genre of music that he particularly likes, but never in his life had he experienced jazz in a worship setting, and he was quite moved by that. Another person recalled confirmation, and picked particularly that her daughter participated in the service. Someone else recalled the Peace Island event several years ago. Some of you may recall that, when some members of the Muslim diaspora from Turkey joined us during worship and then served us lunch afterwards. And we had an interfaith Muslim Christian conversation about our lives and our hopes and our goals. And of course, special music, highlighted today by Steve and Emily Hogel's duet, but also on so many other occasions over the years, and a Good Friday service as well. In terms of what I've called layered or repeated experiences, many people mention the sermons, and this is kudos to Dave and Katrina. Words like fabulous and amazing. Others talked about the communion, how it's open and inclusive. There's no test, everybody can take part. Still others with the traditional elements of our worship together, like Christmas Eve with the candles and Silent Night, or on Easter morning with the trumpets and Christ the Lord is risen again, layered year after year so that the memory is deepened. The stained glass windows, as Bob mentioned, joys and concerns have emerged, particularly in our online worship, as a way of reinforcing our connection with each other, our sense of community, and deepening our prayer. And the great music, singing together, the variety of the music, the well-loved hymns. One person raised with a Lutheran background recalled, "A mighty fortress is our God." And another recalling just how special it is when children sing in our service. So we wanted to take a step back from those individual mentions to try to get some sense of what are touchstones of meaningful worship as we think about our worship life together. And one of them, the elements that are inclusive and participatory add meaning. I mentioned the joys and concerns already, as well as the communal singing. Outreach reports, I'll talk more about that later, but taking communion together, how special was that video today in bringing us together? The traditional elements, as I've mentioned, Christmas Eve and Easter morning, the familiar hymns, the stained glass when we're in the sanctuary. Others could be grouped under a sense of contemplation, the lighting candles, the prayers, the darkness on Maundy, Thursday. Others, the intergenerational aspect of our service was noted by many, the baptisms, children's choir, Betsy's chancel steps, and the others who offer chancel steps stories. Indeed, the memorial services for the saints who've departed from us. And another touchstone, and this is really evident in the conversations, was an appreciation for the diversity and variety of what we do, the different types of music, the opportunity to worship outdoor on occasion, those times, if we're fortunate, 2 or 3 times a year when Fred comes and does his improvisational chants. The fact that it's not the same every week. So in the next part of our conversations, we wanted to dig a little deeper and talk about the different parts of our service and to draw out comments there. And we asked how the parts of service deepen the connections with God, but also help us live out our values in the world. And recurring themes here that we'll keep in mind. Certainly to increase understanding and how the sermons help with that. I think as a congregation, we're a bunch of Ethiopians saying, how can I understand this unless someone guides us? And that is our experience of sermons at Union. And again, the joys and concerns and how that brings us together as a community and helps us understand in a caring way what people are celebrating and what they're having a hard time with. The other parts of the service that nurture connections not just with God, but with each other. Communion, the music, joys and concerns again. The opportunity in the service at times for silence and for meditation. But also, and this came up in a number of ways, bringing the outside world into worship, not just through the sermons or the joys and concerns, which stretch well beyond our congregation, but also what we've called outreach reports. Recall the times when members of the congregation returned from Brownsville, where they had worked with migrants who on both sides of the border, and how deep and meaningful those reports were. Or when Mark Dinglinson or Kay Ann Foster have come from Kumak and talked about the food, the efforts to alleviate and end hunger in Patterson. We could all think of other reports like that. So that was the first two parts of our conversation, and I think Rob now is going to talk about the other questions that we asked in our conversation.
Thank you, Tim. So one of the questions that we discussed in the small groups involved challenges. What gets in the way of us worshiping as we want? But this also naturally led to something different. If we have challenges, can they lead to opportunities? So of course, many of us said that virtual church itself through Zoom brought up many challenges. For example, some people said they might not connect well through the visual elements that they're seeing during the sermons. And they might be wary about, going forward, what will that look like if we have that in in-person worship? But once we do transition over from virtual services to hybrid services in the church, there actually are some ideas, some thoughts, some possibilities that actually came up from Zoom service that we could bring to in-person worship. Many have found solace in the simplicity of joys and concerns, and they would like to see it easier to share joys and concerns during service. Many actually appreciate the passing of the peace, but some people might find it craziness and leading to mayhem. So how can we reimagine passing of the peace once we move back into the sanctuary, especially in a post-COVID world? People have expressed that they really like the opportunity for silence and opportunities to reflect quietly during points in the service. How can we transition from Zoom virtual coffee hours to coffee hours back in the assembly room? So people have really enjoyed getting to know different people each week in the virtual coffee hours. They like being put into randomized breakout rooms because they're talking to people they have never talked to before or might never talk to in the assembly room. How can we do that if we're actually in the sanctuary filing back through the doors into the assembly room? Can we be able to connect to one another, to people that we wouldn't normally have talked to? So another topic that came up a lot was music. We love music. We appreciate the hard work and the talents that Eric and all the musicians and all the singers bring to worship. That's obviously from the survey And from all the conversations that I participated in, people really wanted to talk about music. It's a common way for the congregation to connect to the services, but there still are challenges that people have with music. Some might not like it when the music doesn't connect with the sermon. Some might find it difficult to connect to classical performances, or some might find it difficult to connect to an improvised jazz solo. And some might find it difficult to connect to contemporary music. Because people tend to have genres that they like and genres that they dislike. But the good thing that came out of these conversations is that people really do appreciate the variety in the styles that we hear. And people definitely appreciate how talented everybody is, and not just the choir, but everybody in the, it's almost like everybody in the congregation has musical talents, whether they know it or not. It's pretty amazing. So we welcome a variety of musical styles. It's a way to recognize and embrace diverse preferences among the members, friends, and visitors. So many people are open to new ways of participating and engaging in live music, but something that is simple to sing along with. Something like the call and response is something that we could investigate going forward. People like to sing along is one thing we learned from these conversations. One thing that people had challenges with maybe was pre-recorded videos of choirs or performers who are not necessarily associated with Union Cong. People really like live music. They like to see Union Cong members perform live music, and they like to be able to participate in the live music. Another topic that came up a lot was the sanctuary space. Many people have expressed openness about moving towards flexible seating in the sanctuary. People have really liked to see other people's spaces during the Zoom service. They've liked to be close to the preachers during sermons, to see their faces, to see their facial expressions, to connect like that. And people have expressed the interest in being closer to people, being closer to all the elements of worship. But there are people who are opposed to making any changes to the pews at all. They prefer a traditional sanctuary. And people have said that removing the pews would take away from the reverence of the church space. There are also people who say, I'm interested in hearing this. I'm interested in learning about this. I am wary about change. I would like to see a rendering of what the sanctuary might look like with flexible seating. And people have also talked about the communion table, the baptismal font, the choir loft, the pulpit, saying, what if those were not separated from the congregation? What if they could be more accessible to everyone? And what if we could feel closer to the celebrant during service, during sacraments, or during special moments? So I think now I'm going to pass it back to Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob and Tim and Catherine. Really appreciate your participation in making this presentation. So looking ahead, what can we experience in the weeks and months to come? And before I just tick through a couple of things and then offer some very specific examples, I would start this section of the presentation in the same way I started the opening part of the presentation, and that is to remember the context. And the context here is to assure everyone that most aspects of our worship will remain the same. And the reason for that is simple, because our congregation will remain the same. We're the same people going about worship and being involved in the world around us. And we're just seeking together to try and find ways to do that more effectively. So, but a lot of it is just going to be more of what we've come to love and appreciate about our worship together. So we will continue to hear rich and powerful sermons, prayers, and scripture. We will continue to find meaningful connections to one another through our worship experiences. This is what is part and parcel of who we are as a congregation of faith in this world. And we will continue to experience varied and inspirational music. And in the next several months, we will explore some things in particular. We will continue to exploring how we worship. We will continue offering even more varied music, being responsive to the overwhelming affirmation that we receive from you all about the appreciation that you have for different kinds of music, even if one particular kind is not your favorite. But there's an affirmation of our congregational collective understanding of the role that music plays in our inspirational worship services. We're looking for ways to make joys and concerns more engaging when we return to the hybrid of in-person and virtual worship, because that's something we've clearly learned from the last year or so that we've spent on Zoom. We'll rethink how we pass the peace. How can we do this in a way that is more welcoming to everyone, acknowledging that there are both introverts and extroverts in our midst, and we want to try and let everyone know, no matter who they are or where they are on life's journey, that they're welcome here, and especially welcome to receiving the peace of Christ. We'll be continuing to experiment with the visual elements in our worship service. How do we use visual imagery, slideshows, and that kind of thing as we move forward in a post-COVID world? And we'll look at ways to connect after worship is completed in coffee hour and other ways that will, again, deepen our relationships one to another. So looking ahead, we will take time to discern how our sanctuary supports and enriches our congregation by the following ways: sharing and discussing ideas and images from other congregations. And I know the Digital Communications Task Force has been out and investigating what other churches are doing in this time of the pandemic, and we're learning from them. We'll be inviting experts to suggest ways to improve accessibility and connection in our sanctuary through the use of technology and space. And then we'll continue to explore those ideas and integrate those ideas into what we've learned in this process about how our congregation feels about worship. And then we will seek to gather as an aspiration in the fall to reflect and consider a range of possibilities in terms of moving forward. So just two quick things I'd like to conclude with before I say a huge thank you to the task force, and their names we'll see in just a moment. There they are. These folks have done yeoman's work, incredible work. And what's been really impressive to me is how people have simply stepped up and said, oh, I'll do that. Oh yeah, I can do that. Oh, I can handle that. It's been really inspirational and a joy to participate. So thank you to the task force members and to the scribes who filled in so wonderfully. This slideshow will be available. It will be linked to our website, and we will continue to listen to you and together discern what are the best ways for moving forward. So if there are questions at this time, I would invite you to put those questions in the chat and we can respond. We have just maybe a few moments left, and remember to be in touch with any of the task force members if you have any questions moving forward.
There is a comment more than a question at the moment that those who offered the presentation today are not an accurate reflection of the congregation. We have 3 white men, 1 white woman speaking for us on this important topic, not an accurate reflection of the active membership, not an accurate male to female ratio, and only white people. This is a place for opportunity to be more inclusive and welcoming of God's children. Jane writes, thanks to everyone. This was an impressive summary. Thank you for these efforts. I think you covered it fantastically. Ina asks, how about some field trips? For example, I'd love to see the reconfigured St. Bart's Sanctuary.
If I could just respond to that, we're really open to all kinds of ideas. That's an idea we hadn't, I'll be candid, hadn't considered explicitly, but that sounds like an idea. And over the next several months, we hope to be able to consider a host of ideas about how we might better understand how we can worship with greater sense of inspiration and empowerment moving forward.
I think this is the last call for questions. There are notes of gratitude for all your hard work, which of course I echo.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time participating, and thanks especially to the task force and Dave, to you and Katrina for making this happen so smoothly. We appreciate all your work. We appreciate all of who you are and are grateful for your participation. Thank you.
Mute yourself.